in the southeast. 20 Celsius more likely for the likes of Glasgow, Aberdeen, and then into Thursday evening we'll see some longer spells of rain across Scotland, particularly north of the Central Belt and heavy in the west. Outbreaks of rain also affecting southern Scotland and parts of Northern Ireland. But to the south, some areas of high cloud drifting by. However, it will be a warm night, a muggy night in places, with temperatures for some no lower than the high teens. Friday morning starts off then fairly warm across England and Wales in particular, with some sunshine. Still changeable weather for the north and a wet day in parts of Scotland on Friday, but in the south the heat builds. 34 Celsius the high.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, hi there. Welcome to Brazier. Some fast-paced news from 4 until 6. Today, in the next hour, the Home Secretary says the government remains committed to sending asylum seekers from the UK to Rwanda. That in spite of the first flight being cancelled, as you know, minutes before takeoff. Our old friend, the European Court of Human Rights, is the reason why. Today, number 10, refusing to rule out withdrawal from the court. Having their say in a few moments, the migration and human rights lawyer, Jackie McKenzie, and the leader of Reform UK, Richard Tice. Nicola Sturgeon's admitted that Scotland becoming independent would cause challenges at the border with England, but says the benefits of rejoining the EU would outweigh them. The political editor of the Scottish Daily Mail, Michael Blackley, will join us. And words like, wait for it, wagwan and peng could form part of Britain's dominant dialect over the next few years. Academics at the University of Oxford claim multicultural London English patois is likely to overtake traditional English. We will ask, does the English language need a helping hand? And with me for the next 2 hours, the consultant editor at the Daily Mail, Andrew Pearce. First, the latest news headlines with Polly.
Colin, thank you. The top stories on GB News this afternoon. The Home Secretary insists the government will continue with its plan to deport asylum seekers to Rwanda. That's despite a last-minute ruling by the European Court last night that stopped a planned flight yesterday. Priti Patel says the government is determined to find a way forward. A spokesperson for the Prime Minister says they're keeping all options on the table, including potentially withdrawing from the European Convention on Human Rights.
While this decision by the Strasbourg court to intervene was disappointing and surprising given the repeated and considered judgments to the contrary in our domestic courts, we remain committed to this policy. These repeated legal barriers are, Madam Deputy Speaker, very similar to those that we experience with all other removal flights, and we believe that we are fully compliant with our domestic and international obligations, and preparations for our future flights and the next flights have already begun.
Well, Labour has criticised the plans, saying they're unworkable. The Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper described yesterday's flight as a short-term stunt and said the Rwanda scheme is not a serious policy.
How shameful does that make us look around the world if our Home Office cannot take those basic decisions? She knew about problem after problem. With her policy, she knows this is unworkable, unethical, and won't stop the criminal gangs, but yet she still went ahead and spent £500,000 chartering a plane she never expected to fly.
Well, meanwhile, a manhunt is now underway to find a dozen suspected migrants who arrived in the country this morning off the coast of Devon and who ran away. GBNews understands the Coast Guard received reports this morning of a speedboat carrying 12 young men which landed on Slapton Sands, 30 miles from Plymouth. The group reportedly disappeared into 2 vehicles that were waiting to pick them up. Yorkshire Cricket Club and a number of individuals have been charged by the England and Wales Cricket Board over allegations of racism. An independent panel of the Cricket Discipline Commission will now decide if the individuals have brought the game into disrepute. The ECB hasn't named those involved. The charges follow an investigation into the club's handling of racism allegations made by the player Azim Rafiq. The government says it's disappointed that the European Union is deciding to take legal action against the UK over plans to unilaterally override the Northern Ireland Protocol. The EU says if Britain doesn't respond within 2 months to their challenge, it will take the UK to the European Court of Justice. EU Commission Vice President Maros Sefcovic says the issue has damaged trust between Europe and the UK.
There is no legal nor political justification whatsoever for unilaterally changing an international agreement. Opening the door to unilaterally changing an international agreement is a breach of international law as well. So let's call a spade a spade. This is illegal.
Meanwhile, the government is considering sending more anti-ship missiles to Ukraine to help the country defend itself against Russian aggression. Ukraine says more than 500 civilians are still trapped inside a chemical plant in the eastern city of Severodonetsk, where its forces have resisted weeks of intense attacks. Much of the city has been reduced to ruins. Moscow is claiming they'll evacuate the civilians through a humanitarian corridor if Ukrainians lay down their arms. The Prime Minister has said he's deeply concerned about what may have happened to the British journalist Dom Phillips, who went missing in the Amazon. A second suspect has been arrested over his disappearance, and that of Indigenous expert Bruno Pereira. The country's ambassador to the UK has apologised to Mr Phillips' family after incorrectly telling them a body had been found. You're up to date on GB News. More news as it happens. Now it's time for Brazier.
Well, the government's vowed to press ahead with its plan to send asylum seekers, migrants who illegally enter the UK to Rwanda. Last night, that flight taking up to 7 migrants, could have been as few as just the one Iraqi. Anyway, whatever the numbers were, migrants to the East African country was, as you know, abandoned following a last gasp ruling by the European Court of Human Rights. Speaking in the House of Commons, the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, expressed exasperation over the cancellation and said inaction over illegal migration was not, as she put it, a morally responsible option.
I want to make something absolutely clear today, Madam Deputy Speaker. The European Court of Human Rights did not rule that the policy or relocations were unlawful, but they prohibited the removal of 3 of those on last night's flight. Those prohibitions last for different time periods, but are not an absolute bar on their transfer to Rwanda. Anyone who's been ordered to be released by the courts will be tagged while we continue to progress their relocation.
Andrew Pearce, the Daily Mail, is alongside me for the next couple of hours. Andrew, I heard somebody literally within the last hour on this news channel saying, what a shambles. I think the government's quite happy with how things are going, don't you?
It's a gift because it's the government battling against the liberal establishments, whether it's the courts, the Labour Party, the Liberal Democrats, the judges. But for once, they had the judges in Britain on their side twice. And of course, then the European Court steps in. Now, a lot of people watching this program think, didn't we leave the European Court when we left the European Union? No, we didn't. But now that will be a debate now to the fore. Should we? Why do we persevere? Why do these European judges think they know better than our judges? That's the whole point.
Let's ponder on it a little bit more. The migration and human rights lawyer Jackie McKenzie joins us, as does Richard Tice, the leader of the Reform Party UK. Welcome to you both, and we appreciate your time. Jackie McKenzie, it's been suggested by some, not necessarily in government today, but outside government, certainly in Westminster, that the time is fast arriving for Britain to reconsider its membership of the European Court of Human Rights. What say you?
Well, that's a political matter. I'm quite pleased that we've got it, because I think it's absolutely right that, citizens can avail themselves of independent and external courts if needs be. But let me just clarify one thing. What the European Court of Human Rights did yesterday was to grant injunctive relief to 3 individuals. Now, what they order is not binding on the British government. So the Home Secretary said, well, I'm going to ignore that, and she's entitled to do so. And what they then did, their lawyers then went to the Court of Appeal, the UK Court of Appeal, who granted injunctive relief. So it was UK lawyers who did that. And in my own case didn't get anywhere near the European Court of Human Rights. I got injunction in the upper tribunal, another UK court.
Richard Tice, Jackie McKenzie makes an important point of distinction there about who ultimately has made the ruling that keeps the plane on the ground. For many people, this will feel like a legal morass. They're not interested in legal niceties. They're interested in the fact that 400 people arrived by boat on the Channel coastline yesterday, and today we're hearing about Channel migrants arriving on the Devon coast, a doubling of migrants each year, if not a tripling, and an imminent political problem.
But that's right. And the reality is that there are no good options here, Colin. It's trying to find the least worst option to act as a deterrent to stop anybody leaving the shores of France. And because the government's tried but failed to reach an appropriate accommodation with France, they've moved towards the Rwanda policy. I think the real point about the European Court of Human Rights is that the government had secured the approval of not 1, not 2, but 3 levels of the United Kingdom judicial system. We're an independent sovereign nation, and I think people find it utterly bewildering and appalling that a foreign court, very often staffed by a non-legally qualified judge, very often demonstrating political bias, should essentially overrule our own domestic court system. And, who are we? Are we an independent nation or not? So I think many people will be saying this is unacceptable. From my perspective, from our party's perspective, I think this reinforces we have no choice. If we want to be able to control our own laws and our own borders, we're left with no choice but to withdraw from the European Court of Human Rights, from the European Convention on Human Rights, and, to essentially say, look, we don't actually need lessons from other people about human rights. We invented them virtually 70 years ago, and we've got a very strong and proud track record on human rights, on welcoming refugees and immigration, and long may that continue. But we have to be in charge of it. And the reality is, the more you have illegal migration coming across those waters with huge dangers, the huge profiteering going on, then the harder it is for us to be able to accommodate legal, lawful asylum seekers, refugees, and lawful immigration. And that's to the detriment of our country.
Jackie McKenzie, what do you say to those people? I'll see some of the emails striking this sort of tone, who will say The problem with human rights lawyers, I don't make an ad hominem point, I make a point about human rights lawyers, is that they represent people, for instance, in this case, who want to come to the UK, who within days of arriving, weeks of arriving, are eligible for things like, the legal support that comes through legal aid. But why aren't human rights lawyers backing up those stressed communities where community cohesion is fraying at the edges? Why aren't human rights lawyers queuing up to represent those communities which have to absorb a lot of the shocks of uncontrolled migration?
Well, I certainly do. I spent 20 years in regeneration working on what is now being called levelling up in those very communities. But we represent all manner of people. So, the firm I work for represents people who are victims of bad employers. We represent people who have been affected by personal injury and clinical negligence. All of these are issues that matter to people, and all of that work impacts on human rights or comes from human rights legislation. It's not in isolation. And even if you take immigration, which, seems to get some people exercise, I represent large numbers of British people who simply want to bring a spouse over. I represent hundreds of the Windrush generation who are British citizens and who were told they weren't, and they're part of the community and they deserve representation. So we're not just representing a handful of people. I get very few clients who've come across the channel. I have dealt with some. And my client yesterday, and I only had one, a doctor in an immigration detention centre, and those doctors aren't usually, friendly. They're usually employed by the immigration detention centres, looked at this man, looked at his body and said there were clear signs of torture on him. His own story was that he was trafficked. He was a Kurdish Iraqi. And, why on earth was he carded for Rwanda? Why was he deemed inadmissible? Why weren't we, as signatories to international treaties, the Convention for Refugees and the International Declaration of Human Rights, looking at this man and saying, we are part of a global community where there are 100 million displaced people. We get about 30,000 of them a year. Why aren't we going to do our bit for this man? I mean, that's the bigger question.
Well, yeah, we're on with Richard Tice. We're on for about 100,000 channel migrants this year alone, Richard Tice, aren't we? How do you respond to that point? That these, well, it's Richard. We've only got about a minute left, so it's Richard Tice's turn now. Richard.
But the reality is, the individual that Jackie's just been referring to has come from a safe country. It's called France. Many of us go on holiday there. Rwanda itself, where we would propose to process these individuals, these illegal migrants, has also been congratulated by the UNHCR for its impressive performance on integrating refugees in its society, getting them to work, into agricultural projects, building 20,000 classroom places for children. Rwanda is actually a successful a country in helping refugees. It's got 130,000. So why shouldn't we work with a partner like Rwanda in order to create a proper deterrence? But the way you do that is you immediately remove people the moment they've landed, you take them to Rwanda, you could successfully process them there. And what that will do, that will act as a deterrent. But for those that do come over, they're going to be treated properly, humanely, as we would obviously expect, but in Rwanda, not the United Kingdom. I don't see what's wrong with that.
Richard Tice, Jackie Mackenzie, thanks both very much. Guys, got to leave it there. We're out of time. We're out of time, but we appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed. Andrew Pearce alongside me, just to address a point that's raised in that conversation. The paper you work for famously, stroke infamously, talked about the enemies of the people, the interfering judges. I'm a little bit, I imagine you're a little bit uncomfortable with the idea of just slagging off lawyers when they arrive at determinations that we, the elected, our elected officials, don't agree with. But there's something corrosive going on, isn't there, when the will of the people, as expressed by the 14 million people who voted in this government, do not get their way.
Absolutely. And it's yet again the judiciary making law. For instance, we've got a privacy law in this country which constrains what we can write as journalists and you can say as broadcasters. Who passed that privacy law? Not Parliament. Judges have made it, and they've made it under the guise of the Human Rights Act, which is the Human Rights Act which is being used here yet again by these refugees. And Richard Tice is quite right. That refugee, if he had been tortured, that's terrible, but he was in France, a safe country. It's part of the European Union.
Sixth largest economy in the world.
Yeah, and it's also 2.5 times the land size of Britain, so they've got a lot more room for refugees. And I thought the European Union was the great exemplar for the civilised world, which we turned our back on. So why aren't these people content to stay in France within the EU?
Andrew, for now, thanks very much. Scotland's First Minister says she plans to hold a referendum on independence come the end of next year. Nicola Sturgeon's admitted the plan poses challenges for the border with England. That's Alex Salmond, isn't it, with Sturgeon when they were mates. In a speech last night, the longest-serving First Minister reiterated her calls for Scotland to hold a second referendum with or without legal authorisation from Westminster. Michael Blackley is the political editor of the Scottish Daily Mail. Michael, welcome to you. Where do you stand on this idea of Westminster's legal authorisation? In other words, if they don't give it, this will only be an advisory referendum. And if you're attached to the union, you'll say, I'm not playing. I'm not going to vote. And therefore, you can claim victory, Sturgeon, but it won't count for anything.
Yes, it's an absolutely crucial issue as to how a referendum can actually happen. I mean, Nicola Sturgeon has been pretty clear that ideally she wants a referendum to happen exactly like it did the last time, which is the UK government granting consent and a legal referendum going ahead. Yesterday, it was quite interesting that she moved on a little bit from that yesterday. She said that a legal referendum will happen whether the UK government gives consent or not, which left a lot of head scratching from people that were there, because she then refused to really answer any questions whatsoever about what she means. I was speaking to a constitutional expert yesterday who was saying, really, if it's to be a legal referendum, the only way that it can possibly be legal without the consent of the UK government is to simply tell people the result won't matter. You'll vote, but nothing will happen. There will be no effect from that result. Obviously, if that vote happened like that, it would be a glorified opinion poll. It would be worthless, and you wouldn't have anyone on the pro-union side taking part, I suspect.
Michael, that economic study yesterday, she was talking about the UK's reprehensible record on research and development, R&D. It's a devolved matter for the Scottish Government. What was she talking about?
There was, in the document that was published yesterday, what it tried to set out was how the UK compares to, it was 10 small independent nations that had been selected, and there was a comparison there. There was absolutely no mention in the document about Scotland in that, and as you say, a lot of the areas were devolved, so there was certainly no mention of some of the education problems that we've had, some of the problems constructing ferries. So a lot of people reading that document did think, well, wait a minute, if this is all about having the powers, the SNP look in a lot of areas like they're mishandling some of the powers that they have at the moment.
Michael, do you think the 800,000 Scots who live in the UK but outside of Scotland should be entitled to vote?
That's certainly something that's always been suggested. It was interesting, part of the debate, it was ruled out the last time. Really, it probably is an issue for Scots to vote on ultimately. What was quite interesting in 2014 was that you got a lot of positive feeling from the rest of the UK. You got people saying, please don't leave us. We want you to stay in the UK. And maybe that had an effect. Certainly that was the sort of message that David Cameron wanted to lead at the time. A lot of celebrities were coming out thinking that, but probably it ultimately does need to be a vote for Scottish people. But if you're to go by opinion polls, Scottish people don't want that vote to happen in the first place. There's only 29%, according to the most recent opinion poll, 29% of Scots actually want a referendum to take place by the end of next year under Nicola Sturgeon's timetable. So that's possibly the biggest challenge for her at the moment.
Michael Blackley of the Scottish Daily Mail. Michael, thanks for your time. Andrew Pearce alongside me to reflect on this one. I don't like to play the Remainer tactic of just, here's a reason to be terrified. Here's a reason to be terrified. That border, if it's a hard border and you've got a nationalist government in Edinburgh blaming all the ills of its country on England. I don't see harmony ruling in decades to come, do you?
No, but I don't think it's going to arise as an issue, Colin, because a cabinet minister said only yesterday they can have a referendum in 2039, because that will be 25 years since the last one, 2014, when Nicola Sturgeon and Alex Salmond, who was then the leader of the SNP, said this is a once-in-a-lifetime vote. Well, 25 years on is not once in a lifetime, so that's quite a generous provision. And of course, even if she does hold it, as Micah was saying, if so many people, you were saying, so many people who are unionists don't bother to vote, it will have no democratic credence whatsoever. And here's the other thing. If she thinks she can take Scotland into the European Union, she'll have to accept the euro. That's one thing. How's that going to go down in Scotland? There'll be a hard border with the same issues about customs checks, which we've now got between Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland. Do they want all that? Of course they do.
Andrew, thanks. Coming up, a report suggesting 200,000 homes could be lost to coastal erosion. A warning of more imminent threats. People living life literally on the edge. We'll speak to Dave Mole, chairman of a parish council in Norfolk, where half a dozen homes are at risk of coastal erosion. First, the weather for you.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGibbon. There is some cloud and outbreaks of rain for the far north and northwest today, but for most it's fine. Plenty of sunshine in the south and very warm in places, with the heat continuing to build during the next few days. High pressure is building across much of Western Europe, a continental plume of heat becoming established, but weather fronts will continue to affect the far north and northwest. That's where there are some outbreaks of rain as we head into the evening. Northern and western Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland, and for a time southwest Scotland, perhaps Cumbria as well. That rain turning more showery, tending to fizzle out by the end of the night away from the Northwest Highlands, the Western Isles and Shetland. Otherwise, clear spells and a warm night to come, certainly warmer compared with the last few nights. Temperatures staying in the double figures by and large, and in some places no lower than 14 Celsius. But a bright start to the day for tomorrow. Plenty of sunny spells across England, Wales, southern and eastern Scotland first thing. Cloudier for western Scotland and Northern Ireland. And again here, some outbreaks of rain, mostly light, mostly on and off. There'll be more of a breeze as well for the Western Isles, but elsewhere, light winds, plenty of that strong sunshine, and temperatures rising mid to high 20s possible, with 29 or even 30 Celsius possible in the southeast. 20 Celsius more likely for the likes of Glasgow, Aberdeen, and then into Thursday evening we'll see some longer spells of rain across Scotland, particularly north of the Central Belt, and heavy in the west. Outbreaks of rain also affecting southern Scotland and parts of Northern Ireland. But to the south, some areas of high cloud drifting by. However, it will be a warm night, a muggy night in places, with temperatures for some no lower than the high teens. Friday morning starts off then fairly warm across England and Wales in particular, with some sunshine. Still changeable weather for the north and a wet day in parts of Scotland on Friday, but in the south the heat builds, 34 Celsius the high.
Tonight on GB News, at 6 it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere. We don't talk down to you.
we embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you. And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was, in fact, a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
£4, nearly 28 minutes past. It's been claimed that about a third of England's coastline may be effectively underwater come the 2050s as the country continues to resist rising sea levels. Some communities in rural towns suggest the study, it's published in the Journal for Ocean and Coastal Management, if you know it, is ignoring a more imminent threat of coastal erosion. In Haysborough, small village in Norfolk, the coast is already crumbling and quickly. Some half dozen homes imminently threatened by the approaching cliff edge. The chairman of the parish council is Dave Mole, who joins us now. Councillor, thanks for your time. In a sense, this has been part of the story for the coastline of Norfolk for centuries, if not even millennia, maybe. We think of Dogger Bank, now underwater, once effectively a causeway between the Netherlands and England.
Exactly. We are on an eroding coast. I think we all know that. It's all the way down from, East Yorkshire down to Essex. There's been erosion over the, as you say, millennia. So, but that's the position. However, it has accelerated with climate change and various other factors. So, we must adapt. Is the view.
And adaptation presumably relies on a bit of planning, some engineering solutions, but they tend to be expensive. And if that doesn't happen, well, I mean, we're looking at pictures now, and apologies for people listening on radio. You end up, don't you, I suppose, Dave, with, remember the hotel on the North Yorkshire coast? Remember, was it? I can't remember the name of it. But,
absolutely. Yeah. Planning is, I think, your key thing. We want to keep the community together. We realise you can't be there on the beach trying to push the sea back. We want to keep the community not only together, but vibrant, with, instead of dwindling away, I think the solution is rolling the community back. All right, we'll protect how we can, but it's, as you say, incredibly expensive, the engineering side of things. But if we, as the houses are threatened, if we build 300 or 400 yards inland, we're then keeping the community and we carry on. What is interesting is, though, we've got 4 very historic buildings, the iconic lighthouse, the lovely 14th century church. There's a wonderful arts and craft building that's listed, and we've got a very lovely pub. Now, they're all roughly in a line, and they're all about 200 or 300 yards from the sea, less than that perhaps. We'll see how they fare, because they will have to be preserved, in my opinion.
Yeah. Dave Mole, it's a fascinating subject. We appreciate you talking to us about it. Thanks very much indeed. Andrew Pearce alongside me. I suppose, Andrew, it's one thing if you're talking about a church or a pub that's maybe been there for centuries, as Dave Mole was, but if you've bought a house 200 yards from the sea in this part of the world in the last 20 years, caveat emptor.
What do you expect? It's like if you buy a house on a floodplain. I never understand why people buy a house on a floodplain and then
because they're relatively cheap.
Because they're cheaper, but then they complain when they get flooded. So it's a risk, and it's a risk that's been going on for hundreds of years. So very sympathetic, but they shouldn't be surprised, should they?
This study's also saying it's all down to rising sea levels, which, it may be part of it, obviously, but this is just my eldest daughter's a geologist. She will be able to point to that rock and say, no, that sort of rock gives way. Sometimes if it's granite or whatever, it provides a sort of an impermeable barrier to the sea. It's just the nature of the geology of our country.
Yeah, and as I say, it's been happening for hundreds of years. So when I read the story in the papers, I thought, really?
OK. Andrew, thanks very much. We're going to go to the news bulletin now with Polly.
Thanks very much, Colin. The latest top stories. The Home Secretary insists the government will continue with its plan to deport illegal migrants to Rwanda. That's despite a last-minute ruling by the European Court that stopped a planned deportation flight yesterday. A spokesperson for the Prime Minister says they're keeping all options on the table, including potentially withdrawing from the European Convention on Human Rights. Also in the news today, Yorkshire Cricket Club and a number of individuals have been charged by the England and Wales Cricket Board over allegations of racism. An independent panel of the Cricket Discipline Commission will now decide if the unnamed individuals have brought the game into disrepute. The charges follow an investigation into the club's handling of racism allegations made by the player Azim Rafiq. And the government says it's disappointed that the European Union is taking legal action against the United Kingdom over plans to unilaterally override the Northern Ireland Protocol. The EU says if Britain doesn't respond within 2 months to the challenge, it will take the UK to the European Court of Justice. And Labour is urging the Transport Secretary to respond immediately to an invitation to meet with the leader of the RMT union to avert the biggest rail strike in a generation. Grant Shapps told the Commons the negotiations are a matter for rail bosses and the union. Thousands of workers will walk out over pay, jobs and pensions on the 21st, 23rd and 25th of June. Those are the latest news headlines. You're up to date on TV, online and on your radio via DAB+. You're with GB News. And Brazier's back in a bit.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere. We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you. And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
we're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Take through top stories a little after 4:30 this afternoon. The Home Secretary says the government's Rwanda migrant policy has not been ruled unlawful following a last-minute intervention by a European court which blocked, effectively, the first deportation flight last night. Priti Patel claimed the government was still committed to the scheme to fly migrants to the East African country. RAC figures suggest petrol prices have hit new record highs every day for the past months. The cost of filling a family car, it now stands at around £103. That's for petrol. Wait for it for diesel, 106 on average. Wow. And Network Rail, if you're thinking of letting the train take the strain, is warning that the 3-day train strike next week will cause, as we predicted when this was first announced, half a dozen days, in fact, of disruption because of having to move the trains into place, etc. More than 40,000 staff members at Network Rail and 13 train operators will be out of work on the 21st, 23rd and the 25th of June over a dispute over pay. Let me just turn briefly to Andrew Pearce for his thoughts on that story, because he may know more about this than I do, but I'm always left wondering, because straight away when they announced those dates for the strike, you knew that Monday, we're striking Monday, Wednesday and Friday, and there was no way that normal service would resume on Tuesday or Thursday. So it's up the spout the whole week.
Yeah.
But I think they still get paid for Tuesday and Thursday.
Yes, they do. And it's so cynical the way they've done it. But Mick Lynch, who's the General Secretary, I wrote a rather disobliging piece to the General Secretary of the RMT in the Mail last week, says the strike is meant to cause maximum disruption. That's what they're about. And I think they're taking almost a sadistic pleasure in this. They're boasting this is going to be the biggest strike in 30 or 40 years. It's going to be hugely disruptive, and it's going to affect a lot of people just won't be able to get to work, which means they won't bother going on the trains anymore, which means even fewer trains will be needed, which means some of their members will start losing their jobs.
That's a pretty warped logic, isn't it?
Isn't it?
Yeah. Andrew Fernand, thanks very much indeed. It's time for our debate this hour. I say debate, we've only got one side of it, so we'll make do and mend. Academics at the University of Oxford suggest street slang terms like wagwan, and I apologise for mispronouncing that, and peng could become part of Britain's dominant dialect in coming decades. The words belong to multicultural London English. It's emerged among second-generation immigrant communities in the capital. Experts suggest social media platforms and grime music are helping to spread this patois across the UK. For those of you who might be wondering, wagwan means what's going on. Peng, as you know, Andrew Pearce, references something or someone who's particularly attractive. There's more of this to come. Does the English language need a little bit of help? Or as has happened many times over the years, is it just that the latest evolution in this most flexible and wonderful of languages? The Conservative commentator Calvin Robinson joins us to ponder on this one, and Andrew's going to throw his two penn'orth as well. Calvin, what amusingly in all this, I mean, at least one of my teenage daughters uses some of these phrases. Mandem, I've heard her say mandem, it means a group of men. Things are safe. She said to me, man's hungry. She's an 18-year-old girl. She says, man's hungry. I shake my head. She goes to the kitchen, and so it goes. What do you make of this, Calvin?
Wagwan, Brazier and Pearce, my brethren. I mean, we've always had slang, but in schools and in academia, we've always taught the Queen's English or received pronunciation, as we should, because it's the professional language of the nation, and it's what we should expect if we have higher standards. However, the reason we're pushing this multiculturalist slang is because it's multiculturalist. It's because it's seen as appropriate just because it seems to be adopted by ethnic minorities. And anything that's adopted by ethnic minorities is not to be criticised in any way, shape or form. No, we should be telling our young people to talk properly in professional settings. Speak whatever language or whatever cultural slang you want to at home. But if you're at work or in academia, you should use the Queen's English.
Andrew Pearce, I'm not sure it's been pushed by anybody. I think this is sort of fairly organic. It's a grassroots thing, I think. But I agree with Calvin completely in this sense, that I've always felt that if you enunciate, you sound your T's and your D's at the end of words, it's easier, it's more inclusive for people who are relatively new to that language. Because if you're coming from Poland or Nigeria, you've arrived in the UK, chances are the English that you've learned as a second language is written on the page in front of you. And actually, it's easier to understand who speak those written words vocally, clearly.
There's no doubt about it. Calvin's right. That's the way to speak. But there's always been slang. My late dad, he was a Cockney. And so he used Cockney rhyming slang, but always just as a bit of a joke. He didn't use it at work. He didn't use it at home very much. Stick to the right language. This whole new language you're talking about, Colin, is a complete new world to me because I'm just too old. I just don't follow it, and I wouldn't understand it.
Well,
I need children. Obviously, need teenage children to be with it.
Calvin, it's our responsibility, journalistically and otherwise, today to educate Andrew.
Yeah.
What are crepes, Calvin?
Crepes are trainers.
Trainers, and none of we three would qualify as being a waste man. But what is a waste man?
I would hope not. It's a person who is a waste of space. A person who's not a very good person.
Bang on. And I'm going to mispronounce this horribly. You know what? I don't care. I'm the presenter who once said to Dizzy Rascal, "Now, Mr. Rascal." So I've got no credibility in this area. Gyaldem?
Gyaldem, girls. That's the plural for girls. That's if you even acknowledge that girls are such a thing. But the problem is that this is patronising. This is old-fashioned racism is what it is. It's assuming that ethnic minorities cannot reach higher standards. It's assuming that we have to lower the standards of the language for everyone in order to accommodate a certain minority group. That is not right.
But it is right to say, Andrew, isn't it, that we forget sometimes what a potent source of soft power this language, however it evolves and changes and twists, and it has done over many centuries, it's become one of the great bequests of our nation to the world. It's become the lingua franca, and people who talk to each other in a language they both understand are more likely to get on better.
That's absolutely right. Look, and I'm told it's one of the great driving factors too, with all the migrants who are trying to come here. It's English. It's the common language, and it's continuing to be so. Spanish is catching up a little, but we're way ahead. Eat your heart out, French.
Andrew Pearce, Calvin Robinson, thanks both very much indeed. Thanks a lot. Our top story today: the government's vowed to press ahead with plans to send migrants who illegally enter the UK to Rwanda. Last night, as you know, the European Court of Human Rights intervened and effectively stopped what would have been the first deportation flight to the East African country. Whilst all that legal wrangling was taking place, more than 400 migrants were brought ashore in Kent after crossing the English Channel. Kim Rye lives in Lydd near Dungeness in Kent and has filmed people arriving via small boats and has seen people arriving recently. Kim Rye, welcome to you. What do you make of it all on the beaches of Dungeness?
Well, first of all, it looks exactly like an invasion. People poo-poo you when you say something like that. They call you names with isms on the end of them, which is not true. My perception of it is it's quite shocking when you're down there actually witnessing it and seeing them walking up the beach. There's a very sort of entitled attitude about most of them. They don't look particularly bedraggled or starving. They don't look distressed. They are mostly men. I would say probably well over 98% of men. When you do see children, they tend to be not usually in families. They tend to be being brought in, if I could say that, because obviously they know their chances of staying here are a lot better if they've got children with them. But we know what happens because we speak to people involved, on the quiet, and we know what happens out in the Channel. It's an extremely dangerous thing to put any child on one of those crafts, and well, it's an extremely dangerous thing for anyone to do. And they're quite clearly economic migrants. The majority of them are not anything like what you would imagine to be a refugee.
Lynn, when you hear the Archbishop of Canterbury tweet, as he did this week, I'm just going to quote the line exactly. He said, "Deportation of asylum seekers should shame us as a nation. Our Christian heritage should inspire us to treat vulnerable people seeking asylum with compassion, fairness and justice." The picture you're painting, and you are at the sharp end, you're on the ground, is people who aren't obviously vulnerable anyway.
No, they don't look vulnerable. The majority of them do not look vulnerable. In fact, they're quite... there's a lot of bravado. I asked a few of them today why they came here, why did they leave a safe country. Most of them just ignored the question, and one of them told me it was none of my business. And I quickly retorted, well, it is my business because I'm a taxpayer and I'm paying for this. They just have a very entitled attitude, the majority of them. And if you say anything about this, you're immediately labelled. I do not have any kind of ism. I don't espouse any kind of ism. I think if people are in genuine need, they're coming here for a genuine reason, and they're literally fleeing bullets and bombs, that's one thing. But if you're just leaving France, which is a safe country, and particularly when you're going to put a child in one of those vessels and endanger that child's life, that's quite another.
And Kim, just in terms of, I say, you look into these people's eyes, you see their demeanour, you describe almost the bravado, the sense of entitlement they have. And I think entitlement's a really key word in all this. Citizenship is an amazing privilege. Many of our ancestors have fought and died for the rights that we enjoy in this country. And for it to be awarded to people ought to be the matter of some substance. And when people arrive furtively, when they try and evade capture, when they destroy their passports, when they lie about who they are, it feels like we're getting straight away off on the wrong foot.
That happens a lot. We do have people abscond. We even see them in the shop in the town wanting to top up their phone cards. There's another thing you see. What kind of refugee carries a smartphone? Some of them throw their phones away because there's evidence on there of other activity. A lot of them throw their papers overboard so they can't be identified. They can tell you they're from wherever they like to tell you. It may not necessarily be where they're from. But it's interesting you should mention that, because Dungeness was at the forefront in the Operation Sea Lion campaign during World War II. Dungeness was actually a fortress for all intents and purposes. There was barbed wire on the beach, there were tank traps, there were all kinds of things going on at Dungeness, which it meant that Dungeness had to be closed for the duration of the war. The people who lived there couldn't live there because it was requisitioned. And the place, there is still evidence. There are bomb craters on Dungeness. It's an extremely remote place. There are 3 security problems there because you've got a nuclear power station, you've got an army camp, and you've got an airport. So, people here, we feel if we want to go for a walk on the more remote parts of Dungeness, because I'm a bit of an amateur historian and I like to go for walks, I can't do that because when they're landing and some of them disappear into the bush, we don't know where they are. And quite often they'll have a car waiting. There are people ready to take them somewhere else. And, the whole thing's quite horrific. 5 o'clock in the morning, we get the helicopter. It wakes everybody up. We've got police cars going past. This is a very quiet rural community. Everybody knows everybody else. We're surrounded by sheep. We're surrounded by shingle. It's a beautiful part of the country. And we can't do what we like to do, our normal daily business, going out for a walk, when this is happening, because you don't know where these people are, and you don't know.
And Kim, there's always a presumption. There's always a presumption that the people who are landing in the manner you describe will go on to become huge assets to the country, economically active, help rebuild the country, etc. And some of them will. Of course, I've interviewed several of them. Not all of them will. And quite a few of them will be escaping to this country to start a new life because the old life they had was pretty lousy, because sometimes of decisions they made, and dishonest decisions perhaps. Others might be, for all we know, may actually actively want to do this country harm. I just wonder whether you've seen in recent months, you've talked about people just sort of disappearing into the undergrowth, etc., cars waiting to pick them up. Since the MOD took over the operation, are people still able to land on the beaches and disappear into the hinterland, or has that now stopped?
They can, and they do. Sometimes we see evidence on the beach. You may see abandoned dinghies that are adrift. You may see wet clothes on the beach. We've even seen people walking away from the beach, sopping wet. They're obviously not tourists because they're fully dressed. They don't look like tourists. Nobody walks from the beach sopping wet and goes down a main road to somewhere else, which is quite a distance. I'm talking about a sort of a long road between here and Rye. They've been seen there. There's nothing that they would be going down there for in that kind of state. It's just, the problem is people do not understand what is going on here. They're not seeing it the way we see it. They're not seeing it the way people that live near where they're staying in hotels and other places. The majority of people are not yet seeing the impact that it's having on communities. You know, I know of things that have happened in Folkestone that have involved migrants. Some rather despicable incidents of we have ex-servicemen sleeping in shop doorways there, of them being teased by migrants in the nearby hotel with the attitude of, well, we're in here and you're out there, you know. And these aren't stories. I know where this information comes from, and I've seen the entitled attitude. I've seen the ISIS salute sometimes when they come up the beach. They have a certain gesture, which is the ISIS salute.
Wow. Kim, we've got to leave it there. We're out of time, but we appreciate your first-hand accounts of what you're seeing down there near Dungeness. Thanks very much indeed, Kim. Andrew Pearce, briefly, just a thought on that. The point she makes about the people who champion the cause of migrants is that often they do not have to live with the immediate consequences.
No, and those bishops who signed that unanimous letter in the Times the other day, how many of them have opened up their palaces to migrants? And we know Welby did it, the Archbishop of Canterbury, a Syrian family, for 2 or 3 years. It went wrong and the family left. So if they only practice what they preached.
Thanks, Andrew. 5 to 5 now. 5 things you might want to know before 5 o'clock. At 5, those rail companies just talking about urging commuters not to travel by train. Next week, UK facing one of the biggest rail strikes in more than 30 years. Members of the National Union of Rail, Maritime and Transport Workers, who Andrew's been writing about recently, will walk out on the 25th of July, which could see rail services cut by 80%. At 4, new NHS plans could see pharmacies referring people with potential symptoms of cancer straight to hospital without the need for a GP appointment. The Chief Executive of NHS England says the scheme will help the service achieve its aim of finding cancers early and at a more treatable stage. At 3, a story we've touched on during the week, residents in Whitby on the North Yorkshire coast winning a landslide 93% indicative vote to stop new builds being sold as second homes. Their success has led to reports of a so-called quiet revolution amongst other disgruntled residents in historic towns across Britain. Lyme Regis, for instance, Salcombe, Falmouth, reported to be gearing up for their own fight on second home ownership. At 2, plans to build a theme park in the Lake District have been met with thousands of objections as residents accuse developers of trying to turn the picturesque area into a money-making machine. The project, it's estimated, would include, it's believed will include a roller coaster and zip wire. This is Elterwater Quarry in the Langdale Valley. And the backers say 60,000 visitors could arrive, 60 jobs. Created the petition against the attraction has called the campaign Zip Off Langdale. At 1, in football, 4-0 loss to Hungary last night, England's worst home defeat in 94 years. Some criticism of the Three Lions boss, Gareth Southgate, suggesting the manager ought to focus less on cultural and political issues and more on on-field tactics, while others backed the man who took England to the Euro finals last year. And in contrast, England Test captain Ben Stokes says their victory over New Zealand is his greatest win as an England cricket player. England chased 299 with 22 overs to spare on the final day to win the second Test at Trent Bridge. Those 5 things you might want to know about before 5 o'clock. What caught Andrew Pearce's ear? Here he is.
They couldn't possibly have a theme park in that spectacular part of the world, could they? Would they? No. It's got to be kept and preserved. Some things are just, you can't improve paradise. It's paradise up there.
What do you think of Southgate? I'm not sure if you're a football follower.
I'm not, but I think, look, he got us... I watched that final last year. As I left friends with my partner, he said, do we have to watch another football final ever again? I said, we won't be in another football final for 60 years, so no, we won't have to watch a football match for 60 years again. But he's a good man, Southgate. He's very articulate. I think he's had a bad run because that was a bad defeat last night. They didn't beat Germany, apparently. But I think give him a break because he's done better than any other England manager for years.
OK, that's quite uncharacteristically kind and generous.
Yes.
Thanks, Andrew. Coming up, we'll be reflecting on that decision taken around about this time. Well, yesterday evening, wasn't it, on Rwanda. Stay with us.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. A warm night for many of us and then sunny and hot in places during Thursday. Temperatures are rising over the next few days, but not for everyone. There are some weather fronts in the northwest which will continue to affect parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, particularly towards the northwest. Cloud and a few outbreaks of rain here. Elsewhere, a lot of high pressure and clear spells overnight, widely across England and Wales, but some clear spells also affecting eastern parts of Northern Ireland, southern and eastern Scotland. It's really towards the far northwest of Scotland, the Northwest Highlands, the Western Isles and perhaps Shetland, where we'll see some outbreaks of rain overnight. But otherwise, a dry night for many and a warm night. Temperatures in the double figures across the UK. A bright start then for eastern Scotland, southern Scotland, much of England and Wales Thursday morning. And with the strong sunshine from the word go, temperatures will shoot up. But for parts of central and western Scotland, Northern Ireland, and then elsewhere across Scotland, it looks like there'll be some showery rain turning up by the afternoon. Cooler here, but further south, it looks like temperatures will reach 29 or even 30 Celsius in some spots in the southeast. We're looking at mid-20s across parts of Wales, low 20s for parts of southern and eastern Scotland. But for Scotland, for the far north of Northern Ireland, we'll see outbreaks of rain, heavy and persistent for western Scotland by dawn on Friday. Clear spells once again further south and a muggy night to come. Temperatures really not dropping far on Friday morning and then rising quickly during the day with the strong sunshine once again. Now, for Scotland, for Northern Ireland, a weather front here will bring thicker cloud and some outbreaks of rain, perhaps fringing into the far north of England by the afternoon. But further south, with the strong sunshine, temperatures will be remarkably high, shooting up from Thursday up to 34 Celsius in places before coming down at the weekend.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you. And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
we're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping it.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Coming up live at 5, the Home Secretary says the government remains committed to sending asylum seekers from the UK to Rwanda, despite the first flight being cancelled minutes before takeoff. The European Court of Human Rights ruling stopped the flight effectively. Today, Number 10 refused to say whether Britain's membership of the court was any longer a given. Legal commentator Francis Hoare and the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, join me to ponder on that one. Nicola Sturgeon's admitted that Scotland becoming independent would cause challenges at the border with England, but says the benefits of rejoining the EU outweigh them. The thoughts of GB News presenter Neil Oliver. And protection of the Great British Boozer. 11 pubs in the UK have been given Grade 2 protection to preserve their historical importance. We'll speak to the landlord of one of Britain's oldest pubs before 6 o'clock. For the Yard Arm. With me for the next hour, the consultant editor of the Daily Mail, Andrew Pearce. But first, the latest news headlines with Polly. we had.
The European court that stopped a planned deportation flight yesterday. A spokesperson for the Prime Minister says they're keeping all options on the table, including potentially withdrawing from the European Convention on Human Rights. Priti Patel says the government is determined to find a way forward.
While this decision by the Strasbourg court to intervene was disappointing and surprising given the repeated and considered judgments to the contrary in our domestic courts, we remain committed to this policy. These repeated legal barriers are, Madam Deputy Speaker, very similar to those that we experience with all other removal flights, and we believe that we are fully compliant with our domestic and international obligations, and preparations for our future flights and the next flights have already begun.
Well, Labour has criticised the plans, saying they're unworkable. The Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, describing yesterday's flight as a short-term stunt and saying Rwanda's scheme is not a serious policy.
How shameful does that make us look around the world if our Home Office cannot take those basic decisions? She knew about problem after problem. With her policy, she knows this is unworkable, unethical, and won't stop the criminal gangs, but yet she still went ahead and spent £500,000 chartering a plane she never expected to fly.
Meanwhile, a manhunt is now underway to find a dozen suspected migrants who arrived in the UK this morning, landing off the coast of Devon and who are believed to have absconded. GB News understands the Coast Guard received reports this morning of a speedboat carrying 12 illegal migrants landing on Slackton Sands, 30 miles from Plymouth. The group reportedly disappeared into two vehicles that seemed to be waiting to pick them up. Yorkshire Cricket Club and a number of individuals have been charged by the England and Wales Cricket Board over allegations of racism. An independent panel of the Cricket Discipline Commission will now decide if the individuals have brought the game into disrepute. The ECB hasn't named those involved, and the charges follow an investigation into the club's handling of racism allegations made by the player Azim Rafiq. The government says it's disappointed with the European Union, which has decided to take legal action against the United Kingdom over plans to unilaterally override the Northern Ireland Protocol. The EU says if Britain doesn't respond within 2 months to their challenge, it's going to take the UK to the European Court of Justice. EU Commission Vice President Maros Sefcovic says the issue has damaged trust between Europe and the UK.
There is no legal nor political justification whatsoever for unilaterally changing an international agreement. Opening the door to unilaterally changing an international agreement is a breach of international law as well. So let's call a spade a spade. This is illegal.
The government's considering sending more anti-ship missiles to Ukraine to help the country defend itself against Russian aggression. Ukraine says more than 500 civilians are trapped inside a chemical plant in the eastern city of Severodonetsk, where its forces have resisted weeks of attacks. Much of the city has been reduced to rubble. Moscow is claiming they'll evacuate the civilians through a humanitarian corridor if Ukrainians lay down their arms. And the Prime Minister has said he's deeply concerned about what may have happened to British journalist Dom Phillips, who went missing in the Amazon. A second suspect has been arrested over his disappearance and that of the Indigenous expert Bruno Pereira. The country's ambassador to the UK has apologised to Mr Phillips' family after incorrectly telling them a body had been found. You're up to date on GB News. More news as it happens now. Back to Brazier.
Well, and the government says it remains committed to sending asylum seekers, migrants from the UK to Rwanda, and that planning for future flights has already begun. Last night, a flight taking up to 7 migrants though actually it may have been just the one migrant to the East African country, was abandoned after the 11th hour ruling by the European Court of Human Rights. Speaking in the Commons, the Home Secretary expressed disappointment over the cancellation and said inaction over illegal migration was not a, quote, morally responsible option.
I want to make something absolutely clear today, Madam Deputy Speaker. The European Court of Human Rights did not rule that the policy or relocations were unlawful, but they prohibited the removal of 3 of those on last night's flight. Those prohibitions last for different time periods, but are not an absolute bar on their transfer to Rwanda. Anyone who's been ordered to be released by the courts will be tagged while we continue to progress their relocation.
Well, let's turn, as we often do, to the barrister and legal commentator, Francis Hoare. Francis, welcome to you. Could you cut through the legal fog for our viewers and listeners? Was this always likely to end up with the European Court of Human Rights?
Not at this stage. It's a very unusual step for the European Court of the ECHR, the Strasbourg Court, to intervene before the end of legal proceedings. They do have the right under Article 39 of the European Convention of Human Rights to intervene and give an indication of an interim measure that the member state should take up. And under Article 46, the member state has an obligation to obey judgments, but interestingly, judgments in concluded proceedings. What's happened in this case, and which makes it very unusual, is that first of all, the High Court, after a consideration of a full legal arguments on Friday plus evidence, and then the Court of Appeal sitting on Monday, and then the Supreme Court sitting on Tuesday, all upheld or rejected. First of all, the High Court rejected the application for what's called an interim injunction, that is to say, an order that the government cannot, under domestic law, remove the cannot remove the migrants through the transfer to Rwanda, and both of the appeals were rejected, and they were rejected on the grounds that the judge, Mr. Justice Swift, who's the judge in charge of the administrative court that deals with judicial review, had made a reasonable judgment, well-reasoned judgment, which took into account the risk that Rwanda may not abide by its international obligations, and he took into account the words between Rwanda and the United Kingdom, which are not enforceable in international law, but are a strong indication that Rwanda would, if it was required to, return the individuals back to the United Kingdom, for example, if the policy was found ultimately to be unlawful. But as the Home Secretary said there, it's not a final judgment. This is going to be heard in what's called a roll-up hearing by the High Court at the end of July. And what the ECHR has done is prevent, or at least ask the United Kingdom not to remove the asylum seekers who are subject to this policy for up to 3 weeks until for at least 3 weeks until the end of legal proceedings in this country. And that could be a very substantial amount of time, because you could have an appeal to the Court of Appeal, and then you could go to the Supreme Court, and then ultimately on an appeal to Strasbourg, the Strasbourg Court itself. So it is quite a significant judgment as a result.
Yeah, but Francis Hoare, the way you paint the picture there, it feels like there's appeals within appeals and legal wheels within legal wheels. If the Home Secretary comes to you and says, look, as a lawyer, how do we cut to the chase on this? You say what?
Well, there is as I said, there is a question mark. Some legal commentators have questioned in the Law Gazette today, for example, Jonathan Elkin of the Judicial Power Project, which is a project that is quite sceptical of the European Convention of Human Rights. Some question whether or not this particular action, this particular injunction is enforceable even under the Convention. Because, as I said, Article 46, we have an obligation to abide by the judgments of the European Convention, Court of Human Rights. As we amend, that's an obligation under international law. The obligations under domestic law are slightly different. But this is an intervention in the middle of proceedings after, as I say, 3 courts in England and the United Kingdom have considered the policy in detail. So we are in, I don't know whether we're quite in uncharted territories, to use maritime metaphor, but we are looking at those pictures, but we're not at least in very unusual territories.
Okay, Francis, I'm going to cut across your bows there because the line's breaking up a little bit, but we got the lion's share of what you had to say. Francis Hall, thanks very much indeed. Let's turn to Kelvin Mackenzie, former editor of The Sun. Hi to you, Kelvin Mackenzie. Buy shares in human rights lawyers' practices because the good times are about to roll.
Well, it certainly feels like that, since it looks as though each of the illegals are coming to our country with the right to get legal aid and to defy the wish of the government, and I suspect the wish of all the people, with the exception of people who aren't, who are Labour supporters. I don't know whether you listened to either David Lammy today or Yvette Cooper. They're very big on saying Rwanda, isn't this a disgrace? But they're less sure about what the answer is. And in David Lammy's case, the answer was to hire more people and do some and hand out loads of passports, I suspect, to the illegals coming over here. So it's really shocking. It is political. It is political. And the European Court of Human Rights, if you look back at their history, was only invented in order to give to what had been Nazi Europe the same rights that the British had had for literally centuries. We are the embodiment of human rights. And yet now they're being turned against us, saying that that Rwanda isn't a suitable place for these illegals to go. I thought unusually that Boris Johnson had a very good point he made last night, which is in fact the courts in the European courts and the lawyers themselves in our country are actually doing the dirty work for the smugglers. The smugglers are making a fortune. What they're doing is illegal. And yet the effect of what they're doing is washing up on our shores. And yet we can't do anything about it. But the lawyers can make tens of hundreds of thousands of pounds. I think we should have to announce what each lawyer is getting paid to defy the wishes of the people.
I certainly hear what Boris Johnson said, didn't hear what David Lammy said. I have read what the Archbishop of Canterbury said today. He said, forgive me, yesterday, he said, to reduce dangerous journeys to the UK, we need safe routes. The Church will continue to advocate for them. The problem with that argument, his solution, is those safe routes, if you had them, how many people would come through them? That's one point. The second point is that economic migrants make up a large proportion of those landing on the beaches. They're not going to have the safe routes. They're going to just keep coming across the channel because they've got often... Kelvin Mackenzie's gone. Thank goodness I've got Andrew Pearce alongside me to answer that very question.
Of course. And the Priti Patel says 70% of the people crossing the channel are economic migrants, mainly in their 30s, mobile phones, money, can speak English, are not fleeing persecution. They're coming from a safe country called France. And Kelvin Mackenzie makes a very good point. The lawyers are effectively bankrolling the people smugglers, because by enabling them to stay here indefinitely and with appeal after appeal, the people smugglers can continue their evil, dangerous, lethal trade. It's shameful. And how many of these refugees who were supposed to be put on that plane were on legal aid? We will try to find that out. It's a legitimate question because legal aid is being rationed to many families in this country because we've got big financial problems. But I suspect a lot of those lawyers got legal aid for these people.
It always feels slightly grubby to talk about this through a purely political lens when people are endangering their lives at sea.
That's
and whether
their choice.
That is their choice. And you're right, because I was about to add comma, and communities in the UK are sitting back thinking, how do we absorb this? How do we make the glue of social cohesion work? Because the posh folk, they're not going to be living with the consequences of this and the B&Bs.
Your guest earlier in Dungeness was very powerful, very eloquent. She's living with it every day, and it's really having an impact on what was a lovely, peaceful, vibrant rural community. And these bishops and lawyers don't live anywhere near it in their gilded Whitehall towers.
Kelvin Mackenzie's back with some final thoughts.
Good.
We've got the
We love
cable to
Kelvin.
work. Kelvin Mackenzie, there is no simple solution, or is there?
No, there isn't a simple solution, and it's called the European Court of Human Rights. The Europe is the thing that aggravates the living daylights out of people. I mean, if you go on my Twitter feed, which is an uncomfortable area of social life at its best of times, what has happened this time has really enraged, I think, just ordinary people as well as anybody on Twitter. I admire Priti Patel. I really feel she's doing her best. And the trouble is, you've got on the other side, you've got Labour saying, actually, we want people to come to our country. Why? Because we think they might be socialists rather than conservatives. That's the reality of it all. And they see politics in it. And so they try and, I mean, honestly, if you listen to David Lammy today, the idea that, as he said at the end of it, hopefully in a couple of years' time, we'll be in government. If people of Lammy's quality are in government in 2 years' time, can I just tell you, the whole of the Middle East, all of Africa, everybody will be washing up at Dover, and even I see at Clacton now.
Yeah, and that's right. And Devon, on the Devon coastline today. Kelvin Mackenzie, thanks for your perspective. Thanks very much indeed. 800,000 Scots have made their home outside Scotland in other parts of the UK. Should they be allowed to vote in the referendum, which Nicola Sturgeon said yesterday should now go ahead, IndyRef 2? Scotland's First Minister says she's refreshed the case for a UK divorce and plans to hold that second referendum by the end of next year. She's admitted that partition of the UK would pose challenges on the border between Scotland and England, and that checks, at least for goods, would be needed. Let's turn to Neil Oliver, who, amongst other things, is a GB News presenter. Neil, thanks for your time. Should we just start with this question of legitimacy? What would you advise people like me and you, who consider ourselves to be British first and English and Scottish second, unionists, people who believe in this remarkable union of our United Kingdom, what would you advise them to do in Scotland if there is to be a second referendum, but Westminster's not, as said, it's not legal, it's just indicative? Should unionists boycott that referendum?
It's a very difficult question. I genuinely don't feel I have the requisite wisdom. I would only really speak for myself. I'm not really in the advice business, I suppose. I would boycott a wildcat referendum. I think otherwise to take part in it is to somehow make it legitimate by dint of taking part in it. I think that would be a self-fulfilling prophecy. I wouldn't vote, but it's a very difficult question. I don't think it's realistic. I think Nicola Sturgeon, First Minister, and her SNP are trapped on a hamster wheel. There's nothing they can do. They are a single issue party, and they have to keep promising, insisting upon, demanding one referendum after another, because they exist to break up the United Kingdom of Great Britain. And they can't stop doing it. And another reason why they can't stop doing it is because if they don't try and focus everyone's attention on referendum and on the call for independence, then everyone inevitably looks at their track record, which is dismal across the board on education, on infrastructure, on health. Every measure shows the SNP to have been a disaster for Scotland. The SNP's control of Holyrood makes the devolution settlement a disaster for Scotland. I've personally have long since thought that talk of a referendum, pursuit of a referendum, is just pointless. It's not going to happen. And furthermore, even if by some wave of a magic wand a referendum did happen, the majority of Scots want to remain part of Britain. That has always been the case. It has never been otherwise, and I don't see any point in the near future when it will be any different.
And Neil, it seems to me at least that a lot of the talk about independence, when you talk about what it will mean to people, it can feel very pie in the sky and theoretical. But when I mentioned the border in my introduction there, and the idea of what's been seen as all one middle land, they used to call it the debatable lands, didn't they, as part of the same country. But now, you stop your car, you get out of your car, you have a look in the boot, just in case you're smuggling contraband cigarettes from England to Scotland or vice versa. The train, we're going to get people going through checking papers on the between England and Scotland. That seems to crystallise it.
Well, yes, it's one of many things. It would be just, I think it'd be unthinkable for people, really. Yes, but border checks and the complications of all of that would be a major consideration. But then there's the currency. The SNP have never answered the question really meaningfully about what would actually happen in terms of a currency for an independent Scotland. Then there's the share of the national debt, the British debt, which I've seen estimated recently at £180 billion. An independent Scotland would have no means of dealing with and would presumably just have to walk away from, thereby making it a kind of an international money lending pariah. Who would lend money to the emergent Scottish nation? Because presumably they would just have walked away from any obligation they had to the national debt. But more than that, it's what is worst for me is the continued divisiveness. This is just yet more call for division, and I think it's graceless. I think it's bordering on cruel at a time when people have come through the last couple of years when there has been so much uncertainty, and the economic maelstrom that's yet to come, the tsunami that must one day break upon Britain and on Scotland as a part of Britain, to heap onto that yet more divisive politics from the SNP. Everyone's facing a cost of living crisis. So many people come this winter won't be able to feed or heat. They won't be able to feed their families and they won't be able to heat their homes. And yet the SNP are brazenly trumpeting the fact that they've set aside tens of millions of pounds for another run at independence. To promise to throw yet more money at their dream, at their fantasy, when so many families are going to be on their knees, metaphorically, if not literally, I think is a disgrace.
Neil, as ever, thanks very much indeed. Neil Oliver there. Andrew Pearce is alongside me. As Neil Oliver makes very clear, it was divisive in 2014. Families were riven right down the middle sometimes. There was a lot of... it was a really fractious time, wasn't it? I remember talking to friends at the time and saying the English need, especially the English need to make this work better after that referendum. I fear that didn't happen. I meet young people who've never been to Scotland. It's a third of our UK landmass. Couldn't tell you where Edinburgh is. If we end up being divorced, some of the blame will be on our shoulders.
Yeah, and I think I'm a passionate champion of the union, and I think Neil made the point very well. What's the things I don't understand about Nicola Sturgeon's case and the independence argument? They want to leave the union, which has glued this country together for more than 200 years, and they want to join the European Union. Well, what is the point of that? So you sever a landmass, and then you join an organisation with 27 other countries telling you what you can and can't do. You may have to follow their currency. I just don't understand the logic. It's an emotional thing, isn't it, for the nationalists? That doesn't appear to me to be any logical, intellectual basis for what they're arguing.
And she wants to join NATO whilst ditching nuclear weapons.
She does, yeah. Which is, again, no logic to it whatsoever. It's all in here. It's not in here.
Andrew, thanks very much indeed. Here with Colin Brazier. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Coming up, serious concerns once again raised over e-scooters. There's a pensioner, 71 years of age, who's died after 6 days after being hit by one. We'll discuss that. It's the first time that, by the way, pedestrians died after an e-scooter collision. We'll bring you the thoughts of criminal lawyer Nick Freeman. First, the weather.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGibbon from the Met Office. A warm night for many of us, and then sunny and hot in places during Thursday. Temperatures are rising over the next few days, but not for everyone. There are some weather fronts in the northwest which will continue to affect parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, particularly towards the northwest. Cloud and a few outbreaks of rain here. Elsewhere, a lot of high pressure and clear spells overnight, widely across England and Wales, but some clear spells also affecting eastern parts of Northern Ireland, southern and eastern Scotland. It's really towards the far northwest of Scotland, the Northwest Highlands, the Western Isles and perhaps Shetland, where we'll see some outbreaks of rain overnight. But otherwise, a dry night for many and a warm night. Temperatures in the double figures across the UK. A bright start then for eastern Scotland, southern Scotland, much of England and Wales Thursday morning. And with the strong sunshine from the word go, temperatures will shoot up. But for parts of central and western Scotland, Northern Ireland, and then elsewhere across Scotland, it looks like there'll be some showery rain turning up by the afternoon. Cooler here, but further south, it looks like temperatures will reach 29 or even 30 Celsius in some spots in the southeast. We're looking at mid-20s across parts of Wales, low 20s for parts of southern and eastern Scotland. But for Scotland, for the far north of Northern Ireland, we'll see outbreaks of rain, heavy and persistent for western Scotland by dawn on Friday. Clear spells once again further south and a muggy night to come. Temperatures really not dropping far on Friday morning and then rising quickly during the day with the strong sunshine once again. Now, for Scotland, for Northern Ireland, a weather front here will bring thicker cloud and some outbreaks of rain, perhaps fringing into the far north of England by the afternoon. But further south, with the strong sunshine, temperatures will be remarkably high, shooting up from Thursday up to 34 Celsius in places before coming down at the weekend.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you. And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
You with Colin Brazier on GB News, on TV and on radio. A pensioner's died in hospital 6 days after she was hit by an e-scooter driven by a 14-year-old boy, apparently. This is the story of 71-year-old Linda Davis, was hit by the, we're told, privately owned electric scooter on the pavement last week. The boy has been questioned under caution and remains under investigation. Let's turn to the criminal lawyer, Nick Freeman, who's specialising in traffic and speeding offences and has often come on our show to talk about the perils of e-scooters. And Nick, this is a I'm going to use that dreadful cliche that journalists like to use. It's a grim milestone, but it's been coming for a while.
I'm afraid it has. And once the government unleash these, legitimise them on the pavements, on the roads, that there's going to be many more similar fatal accidents and accidents causing serious injury. So it's something that needs to be dealt with urgently. The government's explanation for legalising e-scooters is they can't control the fact that they are being used on such a widespread basis whilst they're illegal, which seems a sort of concession to the fact. It's rather like saying, well, a lot of people take cannabis, so let's legalise it. It demonstrates how little control the government actually have about the illegal use of these e-scooters. And they need specific bespoke legislation to deal with the problem. And one of the particular problems, of course, is relating to this issue is driving on the pavement. How are they going to prevent it? Just having legislation by itself is insufficient. It's going to need to be supported by technology. And in my view, what we're going to have to have...
I agree with you, Nick. I agree with you, but it's also going to be it needs supporting by the will. I mean, that excuse of not being able to implement the law and stop that horribly corrosive feeling that the law is a bit of an ass. Anybody who lived, as we all did, through lockdown knows that this is a government that, if it really has the will, can send police officers to stop people drinking cappuccinos in parks. It could clamp down on e-scooters if the will was there.
If it was going to prioritise the resources, yes, it needs to do that. But it's going to be such a widespread problem that I don't believe there are sufficient officers to allocate to dealing with this on a regular basis. Yes, they could say, for example, in London, right, today, as a surprise, we're going to deploy 2,000 officers on the streets. Let's confiscate every private e-scooter we can find. Of course, they've got to stop them. They've got to get them. How are they going to do that? They don't know who's on them, and then they've got to get hold of them. That poses an enormous risk in itself. And you know, we need to be able to identify the riders at all times in a similar way that we identify drivers. There needs to be a system in place. And I think we need cameras on pavements so that at any one time we know who is driving an e-scooter. And at least there will be an element of responsibility with that. And I appreciate it's not perfect. There is no perfect system. But if we just close our eyes and say, look, they can go on our roads without number plates, without helmets, we're never going to deal with the problem. We can put police on e-scooters. They're never going to be enough. And these private e-scooters, of course, they go up to 68 miles an hour.
I was going to say, yeah. So if you can catch them, yeah. If you can catch them. Nick, we're out of time. Nick Freeman. Nick Freeman, we're out of time, but really appreciate yours as ever. Thank you very much indeed. Just a very brief thought from Andrew Pearson alongside me.
It's a mess. Look, these private scooters are not allowed on any road or any pavement. It's against the law. So the guy who's crashed into that woman, the pensioner who's died, has broken a law, and it's serious. And currently, you can only go on the road if it's through these pilot areas. They've got to get to grips with it. They've got to make them insured. They've got to have a number plate, and you've got to have a helmet, and they've got to get on with it. So there are going to be more fatal accidents.
Slight caveat: don't have the exact circumstances of the fatal.
Alleged.
We're not sure. Allegedly. Yeah. Thanks very much indeed. Much more news coming up. Stay with Brazier.
Thank you, Colin. The top stories this hour. The Home Secretary insists the government will continue with its plan to deport illegal migrants to Rwanda. That's despite a last-minute ruling by the European Court that stopped a planned deportation flight yesterday. A spokesperson for the Prime Minister says they're keeping all options on the table, including potentially withdrawing from the European Convention on Human Rights. Also in the news today, Yorkshire Cricket Club and a number of individuals have been charged by the England and Wales Cricket Board over allegations of racism. An independent panel of the Cricket Discipline Commission will now decide if the unnamed individuals have brought the game into disrepute. The charges follow an investigation into the club's handling of racism allegations made by the player Azim Rafiq. And the government says it's disappointed that the European Union is taking legal action against the UK over plans to unilaterally override the Northern Ireland Protocol. The EU says if Britain doesn't respond within 2 months to the challenge, it will take the UK to the European Court of Justice. Labour is urging the Transport Secretary to respond immediately to an invitation to meet with the leader of the RMT union to avert the biggest rail strike in a generation. Grant Shapps told the Commons the negotiations, though, are a matter for rail bosses and the union. Thousands of workers will walk out over pay, jobs and pensions on the 21st, 23rd and 25th of June. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. You're with GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Well, here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound is 1.205 to the dollar, the pound is 1.160 to the euro, and the price of gold currently stands at £1,510.87 an ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
we embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you. And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping it.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
You with Colin Brazier on TV, online and on digital radio. Our top stories quite a bit after 4:30 this afternoon. The Home Secretary says the government's Rwanda migrant policy has not been ruled unlawful after a last-minute intervention by a European court blocked the first deportation flight last night. Priti Patel claimed the government's still committed to their scheme to fly migrants to the East African country. RAC figures suggest petrol prices have hit new record highs every day for the past month. The cost of filling a family car now stands at around £103 for petrol, £106. Wow, for diesel. And if you're thinking of going by train instead, Network Rail is warning that the 3-day-long train strike next week will actually cause half a dozen days of disruption to services. More than 40,000 staff members at Network Rail and 13 train operators will walk out on the 21st, 23rd and 25th of June over pay and other things. Now, the farmer and landowner Jamie Blackett's just published his new book, Land of Milk and Honey, Digressions of a Rural Dissident, a diary of the last 2.5 years, quite a 2.5 years in the life of any farmer, battling the challenges of the pandemic and what he, I think, probably fairly describes as prejudices against livestock farming and the difficulties that you face if you're trying to farm in his particular part of the United Kingdom. We're joined by Jamie Blackett now to talk about the book. Jamie, welcome to you. What's the key message you're trying to get across?
Well, I'm really just trying to make people understand a little bit about the challenges that we face as farmers. And in my particular case, farming in Scotland. I think Scotland is generally not well understood across the rest of the UK. And I'm really grateful, in fact, to GB News for giving people like me a voice prior to GB News' arrival on the scene, farmers like me would never appear on the television. The airwaves are hogged routinely by people like George Monbiot and Chris Packham, and it's their narrative that has dominated public policy for the last 20 or 30 years, or perhaps longer, largely thanks to the BBC. And I'm really trying to redress the balance a bit.
Well, and I think if I look at the emails that come in, a lot of people are, I mean, some of it is well informed. There's a lot of people who actually have a deep understanding of rural issues. Some of them are just really worried that in the wake of what we saw during lockdown, when we saw firsthand the fragility of supply chains and the panic that supermarket shoppers felt when the shelves emptied, and suddenly food security, it's like a nebulous phrase, isn't it? But the idea that, as you know, and you've told us many times, a little over half of all of the food that we make is what we got that the wrong way around. We only produce about half of the food that we consume. That feels real and urgent and pressing now.
It absolutely is, Colin, and I think the pandemic was a wake-up call, and what's going on in Ukraine is another wake-up call, and I think the government's partial U-turn at the weekend, when they started to say that actually production of food in the UK really does matter. Previously, I think food was not even classified as a public good in DEFRA's policy statements. I think food security, as you say, is definitely back on the agenda, and quite rightly. But we're also living in a strange time when my book is getting publicity on GB News, but over on the BBC, George Monbiot is calling for the end of livestock farming. And that's certainly not going to help our food security, because that is one of the things, that the protein that we produce in this country, in the north and west of the country in particular, with the wonderful grass that we grow, is so important to our economy of the countryside, to our health. I think people should eat a lot more grass-fed meat, not so much not grain-fed meat at all, actually, but grass-fed meat. And these are all important arguments that we need to be having, and I've tried to expose them a little bit in my book.
Jamie Blackett, let me just turn to Andrew Pearce of the Daily Mail, because there's something that's sort of scratching at the back of my head, Andrew, and it's this, that farming, which insofar as people thought about it at all, 1% of people in the workforce working in agriculture, so it's not got that sort of mass appeal. But it feels a little bit like, and as Jamie Blackett makes clear, it's the likes of George Monbiot and Chris Packham, it feels like now it's become a new front in the culture wars.
That's a very good way to describe it, actually. And Monbiot and Packham are, as Jamie says, never off the airwaves. And if you talk to Monbiot, he says the whole time he blames the farming community for the problems with climate change, global warming, because of the gases that are emitted by cattle, and he thinks he's praying for the day when this government is out and they have a more sympathetic Labour Party to his plan to effectively eradicate the British farming community, which is never going to happen. And yet we had at the weekend, I wonder what Jamie thinks about that, the government abandoning a lot of this rewilding policy because they want to encourage farmers to grow more food so we can produce more of our own food, so we're not dependent on Ukrainian wheat, for instance, because we're much more dependent now on foreign food than we used to be 30 years ago.
Jamie Blackett, that felt like a step in the right direction on rewilding.
I'm actually quite pro a little bit of wilding, but I think there is a middle way. On my farm, we've embraced regenerative agriculture. We're trying to work with nature, with our cattle outside grazing, mimicking the herds of herbivores that would have grazed in the Holocene period before man ever appeared on the scene, and nobody talks about the greenhouse gases that were emitted then. And there are little bits of my farm that I have given over to nature with a bit of wilding, and I think there's definitely a balance to be struck there. But the sort of wholesale wilding that Monbiot and Packham advocate would actually be very bad for our biodiversity, as well as obviously our food security. You need grazing animals in our ecosystem, to create life in the soil on which everything else hangs.
Well, I tell you what, Jamie Blackett, your energy levels are to be admired, because to farm and to be an active tweeter and bang out a second, and I'm sure if it's anything like the first, very readable book, is no easy task. But thanks so much for your time, and thanks for your words of praise as well for GB News. Jamie Blackett. Prince Andrew was left feeling crushed and confused after being banned from Monday's Order of the Garter service, a royal expert said. The Duke of York was not seen at any of the public parts of the ceremony after Prince Charles and Prince William reportedly lobbied the Queen on the topic. Prince William, and here's the thing, reportedly offered the Queen an ultimatum. If Prince Andrew was given a public role, he, Prince William, would pull out. We're joined by the royal biographer, Angela Levin. Angela, welcome to you. Was it really such that stark?
Well, yes, I think it was, because it all seemed to be going smoothly for Prince Andrew until the last minute, when Prince Charles and particularly Prince William said absolutely not, it's just not going to happen. And it's alleged that Prince William also said, it's him or me. Well, that is a very big thing to say, and shows that he has got very, very strong views about his uncle. And quite right too, actually. I think that they were just saying what they felt, what they believed, and also protecting the Queen, because I think it is absolutely appalling if you're very ill and you're very old and your son comes in and starts arguing with you about his position in the family, and wanting you to, bring back everything that he had in the past, which is just not the way to behave to any mother, and certainly not to the Queen.
Angela, I just wonder, and it's impossible to know for sure, obviously, but if you are Prince William and you're looking at a picture of Uncle Andrew, and whether part of your disdain, your discomfort with his role, public role in royal life, is it something, do you think, he feels personally, or it's more a political, almost Machiavellian calculation? He's very bad for my future prospects. He polls really badly. People hate the idea of Prince Andrew, who's done, of course, legally nothing wrong. Is he thinking with his head or feeling with his heart?
I think neither. That's the trouble. I think he's just assuming that because he was once second in line to the throne when he was much, much, much younger, he now deserves the same sort of treatment. And I do think he can't see through himself. He can't step back and look at himself and say, well, I did do this. Or I didn't do this, but I haven't got a good reputation at the moment. Why don't I, I've had a marvellous life. Why don't I move and do something for myself that I've always wanted to do, ride horses all day, all that. I mean, I think he just hasn't thought that is actually what he's been accused of. He's not been found guilty, but the whole sort of grubbiness around him is enormous, and people don't want that. And what really annoys me still is that he still is a counsellor of state, and that means there's 4 people that will stand in for Her Majesty if she's unwell or if she can't get to a meeting or something like that, and sign papers on her behalf. He is one, and Prince Harry is the other, and then there is William and Charles. Well, I really think that should be taken away from him, because if he stands in for the Queen, it will be absolutely shocking for the monarchy, as it will be if Prince Harry stands in. And they've got Princess Anne, and they've got other people who could do that, and I think that needs to be done legally. But I think the Queen's backstepping on that, because at this age in her situation, she doesn't want arguments. She doesn't like to have arguments, disagreements. She's not one of those people who will stand up for herself. And she loves Andrew. She loves Harry. So it's very, very difficult.
Yeah. Lest we forget sometimes, Angela, it's a family. It's a family, isn't it? And Angela Levin, so good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed, as ever. Andrew Pearce alongside me to reflect on what to do with a problem like Andrew.
And the fact is, that's right. She's the Queen, but she's also a mother. and she has a very special bond with Prince Andrew. She spent much less time when Charles and Anne were growing up when they were little. She spent a lot more time with Andrew. That's where that special bond has come. And she wants to protect him, which is understandable. But William and Charles are thinking about the institution of the monarchy. Andrew is a PR disaster. And then you get Fergie in the papers today saying he's a good man and I'd marry him all over again, he's a good guy. Look, if he is a good guy, he still has to explain why he paid £12 million to Virginia Giuffre, a woman he says he can't even remember meeting, to shut down that court case because it would have been so embarrassing. I just think if he hadn't done that, the court case would have been going on slap bang during the Queen's Jubilee. I feel very sad for the Queen that all this is happening, really. It's desperate because she's nearing the end of her fantastic reign and she's got Harry over in America. He's going to throw a load more bricks soon with the publication of his book, which will be awful, and Andrew a continuing drain. And I think when the Queen's no longer with us, Prince Charles will probably send him to live on a farm on the Balmoral estate where he can do very good work.
Is there anywhere, I mean, is there a way of insulating him from a world full of smartphones and social media? Can you actually wrap him up in bubble wrap?
They could do that. The Balmoral estate is about 20,000 acres. He could go there and he could spend lots of time, as Andrew said, riding horses. He loves horses. And retire. Lots of people used to retire at 62. He's 62. Retire. He'll have quite a good pension.
Andrew, thanks very much indeed. Temperatures, as you know, set to soar come the end of this week. The mercury... do people still use mercury to find out how hot it is? We'll discuss that in a second. Anything up to 35 degrees on Friday. If you've read the newspapers today, you'll see they're calling it FRY Day, Friday. Get it? Parts of the UK will be warmer than the Greek islands of Santorini and Mykonos, as well as Los Angeles and Hawaii. Whoever wrote this has just been dreaming about places to visit, haven't they? But the hot weather is set to end abruptly with a high risk of thunderstorms. Really from the weekend on, actually. The weatherman, John Ketley, joins us now. We talked about this, John, I think on Monday, but it's a story that preoccupies people, as weather does, as you know all too well. What are you currently expecting? And is mercury still used to measure temperature?
Well, I don't see why not. It's the old-fashioned way. It's the way I was brought up. But we do have electronic gadgetry these days, which is probably that fraction more reliable, I guess. So you had to look at a mercury stem up the glass tube, which was... it depended on the weakest link, which is usually your eyesight. So I think the electronic gadgetry is probably more accurate. But yeah, we're still possibly looking at temperatures into the low 30s, certainly. It's been 28 today at Ascot and central London as well. It isn't widespread across the board. We talked about this on Monday, I think, Colin, that it was still pretty wet at times over Scotland. There's more rain to come there in the next 2 days as well. But temperatures generally, even across eastern Scotland, are on the rise. We've seen 21 today there on the eastern side of Scotland, but 28 today in the southeast, and we're going to see similar temperatures across the board tomorrow. But I think it's Friday when we are going to see this rapid rise in temperature. It is getting more humid, even now outside here where I am. It's getting more sultry. You can feel the difference from how it was this morning. And that's the sort of thing that's happening for the next 36, 48 hours. Increasing oppressive atmosphere, really. More tropical air coming all the way up from Spain and northwest Africa possibly as well. So it's on the rise. Temperatures certainly will get into the low 30s. Now, if we get something like 33.9 or more on Friday, that will be a record for that date. We've never beaten 33.9 degrees on the 17th of June before, although the record temperature for any June goes back to 76. And that was 35.9 on the 29th of June in Southampton. Remember, we talked about the 76 hot summer the other day, and you gladly mentioned the fact that you actually do remember it because of the cricket and all the parched outfields at the Oval and such like places as that.
John, very nice to talk to you. Walk down memory lane and imagine being at Ascot now, trussed up in your top hat and tails in temperatures like this. Our thanks to John Ketley, as ever. And Michelle Dewberry is in the studio complex thinking about her show to come. Michelle?
Hello, Colin. Yes, indeed. Now, what can we start on my show? What else other than the European Court of Human Rights? Many people are outraged what went on, Colin, about that flight yesterday. People are asking, is it now time for the UK to leave that institution? So I want to look at that. Also, really sad story. We all know childhood obesity is on the rise, but so is now, as a result, type 2 diabetes in children. Colin, this can have serious and lasting health damage on these kids. There's been huge calls now for the government to do more, saying that the government is letting these kids down. But hold on just a second. Surely, Colin, I can't comprehend why anyone would disagree with this, but surely it's the parents' responsibility, first and foremost, to keep these children safe, healthy and well. Also, e-scooters. The first pedestrian has been killed by one of them, Colin. So we're asking, should they be banned? I say no.
Oh, you surprised me. We'll maybe get to talk about that some other time. I think I'm inclining increasingly to a diffident yes. I think they're causing too much trouble. Michelle, thanks very much indeed. Much more from Michelle will be coming up very shortly. Our thanks to Andrew Pearce, who's been alongside me today for the last 2 hours. No doubt Rwanda remains very much a top story. More to come.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGibbon from the Met Office. A warm night for many of us, and then sunny and hot in places during Thursday. Temperatures are rising over the next few days, but not for everyone. There are some weather fronts in the northwest which will continue to affect parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, particularly towards the northwest. Cloud and a few outbreaks of rain here. Elsewhere, a lot of high pressure and clear spells overnight, widely across England and Wales, but some clear spells also affecting eastern parts of Northern Ireland, southern and eastern Scotland. It's really towards the far northwest of Scotland, the Northwest Highlands, the Western Isles and perhaps Shetland, where we'll see some outbreaks of rain overnight. But otherwise, a dry night for many and a warm night. Temperatures in the double figures across the UK. A bright start then for eastern Scotland, southern Scotland, much of England and Wales Thursday morning. And with the strong sunshine from the word go, temperatures will shoot up. But for parts of central and western Scotland, Northern Ireland and there